Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Carmen Vitali here with you guys a little early because it's Christmas week. And, Goodell had to spread out all the football games to make sure that we had to work as much as possible throughout Christmas week. No, I'm kidding. We got a lot of football to talk about, but we are here a day early because of exactly that. We got Christmas Day games. We got Thursday games. We got Saturday games. We got Sunday games. This is the time of the year, Carmen, when football absolutely takes over. I appreciate you taking over the Christmas spirit here on this show, carrying me hard because I'm at my parents' house right now and I've got no Christmas stuff on. I got no hat. I got no tree. Feels like I could be doing the show in July.
You could just have a blank wall behind you. Honestly, like what's going on? I've got the Christmas tree. I brought a Santa hat. Clearly just gonna have to carry the team today.
I don't even have anything Christmas related like within reach. I don't like, what are my parents doing out here? I guess I should have thought of this before we went live, but
no, that's okay. No, the fact that we do have games on Christmas, but also I thought, all right, so we're gonna do this show a little bit early, right? It's Tuesday.
Yes. Yep.
And I'm like, all right, since there's games tomorrow, though, we're at least gonna have some more injury information than we usually do. That's not the case. Only the Kansas City Chiefs injury report is out right now, so we're still gonna have to kind of guess. At this point, but maybe we just shouldn't have games on Wednesdays. I don't know. Player safety and all that.
Christmas being on a Wednesday is kind of like the worst case scenario, especially if you want to have games happen, because it feels like if Christmas was on a Tuesday, I don't think they could do it, or they would have just made it like Monday Night Football of the next week, right? And they could have done something where they pushed it back a little bit. Wednesday, the league sort of feels like they can get away with starting the week on a Wednesday. I do think it's funny that the two teams that played on a Saturday, they just flip-flop opponents. Like, it's just the same four teams.
That's the only way that you could have possibly done it, because 100%. Now you have it's like the Thursday night schedule now for these teams because they played on Saturday, so you get 4 days rest. But we've seen time and again that, all these injuries crop up and these players not getting enough rest, and you're just like,
well, the games are going to happen. The games are going to happen. They're on the schedule.
They're going to happen. I remember very vividly waking up on the morning that Goodell announced that, and I was like, cool.
Well, cool. Now we get to talk about them. We get 2 Christmas Day games. We got a Thursday game. We got a bunch of Saturday games now. And then, of course, we got the Sunday slate as well. We're here to preview all of it. Oh, and then Monday. I can't even forget about Monday Night Football. All these games. We're going to talk about all these games. We're going to give you a matchup that matters. We're going to give you our plus factors here in this one. If you want to follow along with the show, you can get a PFF Plus subscription right now over at pff.com, and you can see all these premium stats that we're going to talk about here, these big time matchups that we think are going to make the difference, and then these guys that we think are going to be big time X factors. If you want to take those into your fantasy football lineups, into your betting strategies, whatever, we're here to help you out, and you can help yourself out by getting a PFF Plus subscription. So let's start by talking about the first day of the first game, of the Christmas Day slate, and it is the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers lost last Saturday to the Baltimore Ravens, and the Chiefs were victorious over the Houston Texans. And so 2 teams kind of going in the opposite direction over the last week. What's your matchup that matters here, Carmen? What do you got for this one?
Yeah, it's got to be. I think I talked about it last week too, but it's become even more relevant this week. It's these Kansas City offensive tackles, and now going up against a Pittsburgh defensive line that's one of the best in the league. Mm-hmm. You've got injuries to deal with along the offensive line in general. DJ Humphries is out. Jawan Taylor is questionable. The tackles specifically, the Kansas City tackles already had the 4th worst grade in the league. And now, again, like I said, you're going to be going against a really, really strong Pittsburgh defensive front, and that could matter. We know that Patrick Mahomes' ankle isn't really a concern right now anymore. Not that I don't think it ever was, apparently. But at the same time, I mean, there's only so many hits I think you can take along that offensive line before it does start to affect things, despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. I think that on the other side of things, the Steelers' offensive line versus Kansas City's defensive line, to me, is the matchup that matters. So we're staying in the trenches, and we're just flip-flopping sort of the emphasis here, because the Steelers' offensive line last week against the Ravens, the Ravens didn't even really have to blitz to get home and get pressure. Like Mason McCormick had a really bad day. Broderick Jones at tackle had a really bad day. Even Zach Frazier, somebody who's been playing really well this season, really struggled against the Ravens front. And again, they weren't bringing a lot of extra guys. They weren't being overly aggressive. They were trying to win with 4, and they were winning with 4, which I think is concerning facing a Kansas City Chiefs pass rush that played really well last week. Chris Jones, 8 pressures, 26.1 pass rush win percentage. George Karlaftis, 77.5 pass rush grade. He had 7 pressures himself and an above 21% pass rush win percentage. And so the defensive line for Kansas City was just playing very, very well against a poor Texans offensive line, particularly on the interior. I will admit that. But just going off of what we saw last week with the Steelers, and not that much better. Now, I think they have a better ceiling than the Texans' interior offensive line, but still, for as much as the Steelers struggled with blocking on the interior offensive line last week, it's not like it gets any easier this week. I think Chris Jones, it sounds like he'll be good to go. Obviously, he's a little bit banged up. You mentioned that we're sort of late getting injury reports out there, but I haven't heard anything to the contrary that he wouldn't be out there. But the defensive line, I think, is just playing good for Kansas City overall. So
he's officially designated as questionable.
Okay,
because Kansas City is the only injury.
Oh, so they are the only injury report that we have. Okay. So I think that he's going to play, and I think that him being out there, he's going to be effective. So the Steelers just have to play better on the interior offensive line, or it's not going to get better for them. My plus factor in this one, I'll stick with the Kansas City Chiefs side of things, and I'm going to go with Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown last week was able to play well. It was his first game back. He ended up getting 8 targets, 5 catches, 45 yards in this game. I think he's going to be a big deal for what the Kansas City Chiefs want to do, because you talked about how they've had some struggles along the offensive line. It doesn't look like it's getting better when it comes to guys being back out there, or at least a little bit more healthy. So what we saw last week from Mahomes is, as they've been shifting guys along the offensive line, the time to throw was really low for Patrick Mahomes. They understood where the ball was going before the ball was even snapped, and that was their entire offensive game plan. It was very fast. The time to throw, more than 50% of Mahomes' throws last week were below 2.5 time to throw. And so that's a very, very fast game plan, getting the ball out of his hands very quickly. And I think Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, obviously, as well, are 2 of those players who, like the mold that they created for Rashee Rice back when he was healthy. Like, hey, let's get the ball in his hands quick and let's let him be a playmaker afterwards. So I think that's once again going to be a big time part of the game plan. And so how Marquise Brown plays as a yards after catch guy against the Steelers secondary group that has struggled this season, right. I think that'll go a long way into telling you who's going to win this one.
Yeah, you think that given Hollywood Brown's workload, you think that the Kansas City Chiefs were missing a wide receiver and kind of needed that as part of their offensive game plan? I mean, just the fact that he first came back had that much work, that just shows you how desperate they were. I'm going to go on the other side of the offensively, the things. George Pickens. He didn't have a whole lot of catches last week, but they were all explosives. 74 yards and a touchdown on just 3 catches versus the Bengals. And not to mention, I mean, we've seen George Pickens be kind of a fiery character. And
Bengals. No, they played the Ravens. Is that their week? Which week are you looking at for him with the Bengals? Because he hasn't played in a couple weeks now.
No. Sorry.
He is he was an X factor for me. There's no doubt about it. But
I know you're right. No, the last game he played, I misspoke. That's what I'm talking about. The last game he played. So you think that he should be back, and that's one of the things that I think could be a plus factor, obviously, for Russell Wilson. And he was jawing this week on Twitter.
Always a good sign.
So you know that he's a fiery guy, and this is kind of one of those. It's a nationally televised game. It's Kansas City. It's the Kansas City Chiefs. You know that this is kind of one of those games where you feel like he's gearing up for it. And again, talking smack to certain media members, telling them that he's going to pull up at their house.
That's not great.
Yeah, no. So we'll see. Again, Pittsburgh's injury report isn't out. So we'll see, but if I feel like if there's any game that he comes back for, it's got to be this one.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin had talked about this, I think, right after the game against the Ravens. He said that it feels like there's a chance that George Pickens could go in this one. Obviously, he's missed more time than they thought that he was going to with that hamstring injury, but there's no doubt that the passing attack just is not the same without George Pickens. And if they stand a chance in this one, I think he's got to suit up. But it seems like he could. So you're right. He was a big part of their offense before he went out of there. And over the last couple of weeks, they've definitely missed him before this game. Hopefully he can return and give them a little bit more of a playoff push. for this one. Okay, so the next game is the Ravens and the Texans. Again, we're just flip-flopping opponents from what we had on Saturday. My matchup that matters, I'm going to stick along the interior offensive line just because it's, well, bad. I mean, it's sort of the same storyline. I mean, like the reasons why the Steelers struggled on the interior offensive line last week is because the Ravens were really able to get after them with 4. The reason why the Kansas City Chiefs defensive players, not taking away talent level from them, but you guys know what I mean. The Texans' interior offensive line is bad. The Steelers' interior offensive line was bad. The Ravens took advantage of it last week. Why would I think that that's going to be any different this week? I think C.J. Stroud obviously going to play very motivated. It was a very emotional day for him, talking about watching his best friend and Tank Dell go through that injury. And so it's sort of tough to, pick yourself back up and play a football game after that. But now that he's had a couple of days to really think about it, and, Tank Dell, of course, he got the diagnosis, but he's been out there. He's been tweeting like motivational things. Obviously, he's very heartbroken, but I think CJ is going to go out there and want to play extremely well for one of his best friends. And I think we're going to get a very, very, very motivated CJ Stroud, which I'll get to in a second with my plus factor. But ultimately, if the interior offensive line can't hold up for him in front, it's going to be a really difficult day for him to be able to play the way that he wants to. So the Ravens were able to, like I said, get home with 4 last week against the Steelers. It's hard to look at this matchup against the Texans and how their interior offensive line is played and think that they're not going to be able to do the same. So Stroud's going to be under a lot of pressure. It's just a matter of how he plays under that pressure. So that, to me, is a big-time matchup of just how much the Ravens are going to be able to get home in this one. What about you? What's your matchup that matters?
Yeah, that was mine. Also, because you look at Shaq Mason, he has been held out of practice this week. Again, we don't know his final game's designation, but it's not only in pass protection when it comes to the Houston offensive line and CJ Stroud, they rank 28th in run blocking grade, right? So they're not doing a whole lot kind of across the board here for this Houston offense, and it's making things a lot easier, or a lot harder, obviously, for CJ Stroud, but it's also making it harder just from the standpoint that they can't really run the ball right now. And they rank 26th in overall offensive grade that the Houston offensive line does. And again, like you said, this is a Baltimore defensive front. They can get pressure with 4 and make it look pretty darn easy. They have this 12. They rank 12th in EPA per pass rush play, and they have the second most sacks in the league right now with 46. Baltimore does 55 unblocked pressures. That ranks 12th as well. So it's going to be a test. But like you said, I do think that CJ Stroud is going to be extremely motivated given what happened last week, and just you saw the emotion on his face. I mean, I wanted to cry at that point.
Right. Yeah. No, it's tough. It is. It's not a cliche. It's the worst part of the game when you watch somebody go through that and you think about all the work that they've put in to get to that point. And it's a violent game. It's a physical game. Injuries are part of it. We all understand that, but it doesn't make it any easier when you watch these guys and these moments kind of get humanized like that. And again, I think that given that Tank, like I said, has been tweeting, and I'm sure he's been, talking to all of his players and friends and everything like that. I think CJ is going to be really motivated for this one. I think Nico Collins has to be motivated too, and not that he's shown any signs of not being motivated since coming back from injury. 30.5 threat percentage on this team. So they're emphasizing him quite a bit. If you're new to the show, it's basically wide receiver usage, how often you are getting targeted per the routes that you are running. Nico Collins is up there above 30%. The next closest pass catcher, so not counting Joe Mixon. I'm not counting Joe Mixon. If you go to just pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends, the next closest guy to Nico Collins is actually Dalton Schultz at like 18.5%. So it's a massive gap between who CJ is really going after consistently, and it's Nico Collins. I saw his over-under for this game, I think is like 90.5, which is a lot. That's a lot of yards to have as a number for an over-under, but I got to think that if the Texans are going to win this game, he's going to hit the over. So if you think this is going to be highly competitive, then you got to think that Nico Collins is probably getting over 90 yards, probably getting over 100, to be honest with you, because they're going to need him a ton in this game. No Tank Dell, no Stephon Diggs, obviously losing him earlier this year. So to me, it's kind of an obvious, but to me, it has to be the obvious of Nico Collins really balling out for this team.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think that there might be an increased workload then for that very same reason with Dalton Schultz. And you saw him he had 5 for 45 last week, had the touchdown catch. That might be one of those guys that CJ Stroud can kind of lean on when Nico Collins isn't an option, but that he's going to try to feed Nico Collins. But on the other side of things, something that I didn't realize until I kind of looked into it this week was Derrick Henry hasn't scored in a month. I don't know if you realize that either, but it's his longest streak without a touchdown in, I think, 6 years, if I did the
Wow.
math correctly. I know. So he hasn't gotten into the end zone in a month. And you have to think that, and like Zay Flowers was also on Baltimore's injury report. Justice Hill didn't practice because he's got a concussion. So like, a lot of the plus factor here has to be Derrick Henry, but it has to be Derrick Henry specifically getting into the end zone, because I don't know how much production you're going to get outside of that, especially when you have a guy like Derek Stingley Jr. On the other side for the Houston defense that is allowing the lowest NFL passer rating with 41 this year among corners. So that's something that Derrick Henry is going to have to be a huge part of his game plan, as he always is. But he's going to need to. I want him to score. He wants to score. He hasn't scored in a month.
Yeah, and I think people who might be listening to this are like, okay, well, you've gone this far talking about this game. You haven't mentioned Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is kind of like the constant. Like Lamar is sort of the duh, right? He is the reigning MVP. He is right there in the MVP conversation. He was unbelievable last week and the week before as well. He is on a total hot streak. So to be honest with you guys who are listening, everything that we talk about here, the matchup that matters, the plus factor, it revolves around basically stopping Lamar Jackson. Like we think that he is going to be fantastic for the Ravens. In the review show, we also talked about the impact that Kyle Hamilton has had since he's been moving back to more of a free safety spot. Really, this game, with the Ravens being favored the way that they are, it's just a matter of what do the Texans need to do to keep pace, because this Ravens team is one of the best in the NFL, and obviously led by a guy who could be on his way to a second consecutive MVP, which would be quite the achievement there from him.
And
so those are the two Christmas Day games. Now we're going to fast forward to Thursday. So the very next day, well, look at that. It's NFL football still right there. Why didn't they just have a Friday? Just take one of the Saturday games at this point and put it on a Friday and just make it like consecutive NFL football at this point. But yeah, the Thursday night game, it's the Seattle Seahawks versus the Chicago Bears. Don't need to remind anybody that the Chicago Bears have been struggling over the last second half of the season, to be honest with you. 0-9 in their last 9 games. The Seattle Seahawks coming off of a loss to the Minnesota Vikings at home. They had to watch the Los Angeles Rams win this past week, which makes it tougher for them to win that division. You know they're going to want to bounce back in a big way, but Chicago, they're hosting this one. Carmen, you've got your finger on the pulse of Chicago more than I do. Is this a situation, do you feel as though this team still has a lot of things to fight for, or are we getting towards the end of the season, and do you feel like they're maybe just, hey, let's hit the sim to next season button, and the Seattle Seahawks might get a big one here in Chicago? What do you think?
Well, we talked to DJ Moore. He's already thinking about vacation. That was something that came out last week. He was asked about the future of Chicago and next season. He's like, I'm not thinking about next season. I'm thinking about vacation. You're like, that's what you want to hear out of your number one wide receiver. But I don't blame him at the same time, because things have just gone spectacularly wrong for Chicago. There are some individual things that the Bears do have to play for. Stuff like Caleb Williams could actually, this is just shows you the plight of Bears fans and how they really haven't witnessed a whole lot of offensive football, because Caleb Williams is realistically within reach of the Bears franchise passing record, not just rookies, not whatever. He is within a realistic reach of surpassing the Bears single season passing yards record. I believe he needs 284 yards in each of the last 2 games of the season for Chicago to reach that mark, which, yeah, I mean, 284 yards for a rookie.
Is that over 4K? No, it wouldn't be 4K.
No, it's not 4K. The rookie, or the record rather, is 3,838 yards. Mm-hmm. So it's not quite 4,000. The franchise has never had a 4,000-yard passer. But again, Caleb Williams still wouldn't even need to get to 4,000 to break that passing record. And 284 yards, especially when you take into account how much garbage time the Bears have been playing lately, that's actually kind of within reach. So they have stuff like that to play for. But what I look at when it comes to this Bears team mostly is this defense has not been the same, even since Matt Eberflus was fired. And say what you want about Matt Eberflus as a head coach. He was a great defensive play caller, really good defensive coordinator. Bears have dropped their man coverage rate and allowed a higher missed tackle rate since firing Matt Eberflus. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at that kind of stuff, then I look at Seattle with Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. Like that's something that kind of rings alarm bells. Again, we don't have any sort of injury report. I know that Kenneth Walker kind of fought through that game, this last game, I believe. But that's something that the Chicago's run defense just hasn't been the same. Their defense overall has not been the same. They've struggled again. They're allowing a 50.8% success rate since week 14, which is the second highest in the league in that span. So this defense seems like it's all but given up is basically what I'm getting at. And so I don't really think that the Bears have much to play for when it comes to winning this game. I don't think that they have right now kind of the motivation to play spoiler to teams, especially if it's a team that's not in their division. But I do think that there are some kind of individual things that they could be after offensively, at least, and that don't really hinge on whether or not they win the game. So I think that's good news for Seattle.
Yeah, in my matchup that matters, I think it's the Seattle Seahawks offensive line versus the Chicago Bears defensive line, because when you look at the Bears defensive line, the 6 players that have gotten the most pass rushing snaps for their defensive line over the last month, none of them have a pass rush grade above 60.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of them, it's just Montez Sweat, has a pass rush win percentage in double digits. And even Montez Sweat's like 8, I think he's 11.6 or something like that. Like, it's not even like he's where you want him to be. So this on the flip side, the Seattle Seahawks offensive line has been an Achilles heel for this team all season long. They've given up so many pressures. Last week, they had a 68.8 pressure rate allowed. That's crazy.
Awful.
74.9 pass rush grade against them. It was not a good situation for them. 37.7 pass blocking grade overall, which was a season low for them, which is really saying something because of how bad their offensive line has been. So the fact that it's not even going in the right direction, that it's barely getting any better, that's not good. So it's sort of one of those things where Chicago hasn't been able to get after the passer. Seattle hasn't been able to block anybody. Who stands out here?
Yeah.
Who stands out on this team? That's why it's like, if there's somebody who can get a little bit more push out of one of their weakest units in this game, and a weak unit that the offensive line and the trenches, I should say, just matters a lot. That to me could be what really puts this team over the edge. If this one's in Seattle, I'm going to be honest, I would not give the Bears any chance at all whatsoever.
Right.
But the fact that it is at home, maybe that is a little bit better for them. Ultimately, though, they've got to get after Geno Smith, because if you don't, he's just going to tear you apart, especially because this coverage unit for the Bears has been one of the most disappointing parts of the entire second half of the season, really just the entire season in general for Chicago. I felt like it was going to be a lot better, but you talked about the drop-off that there has been since Matt Eberflus was fired, that the coverage unit, it also goes along to that, along with the missed tackles. So What about you? What are your other points you want to make about this game?
Yeah, no. And I mean, I think a lot of this also has to do with Jaquan Brisker going out. There's kind of a perfect storm happening in Chicago as to why that coverage unit has really just dropped off between, their coordinator being fired, Jaquan Brisker not being there, and then just overall vibes. There's that as well. There is a plus factor, I think, for the Bears that, again, in thinking about this game, I think about what could possibly hurt the Seattle Seahawks. And Keenan Allen is the guy that I think you kind of need to hone in on. It's not even so much DJ Moore, who I think is widely seen as the top receiver for this Bears offense, but Keenan Allen, since Thomas Brown took over as coach, as offensive coordinator, so all the way back in week 11, Keenan Allen has averaged a full yard more per route since then. He's also been targeted at a higher rate since then. And we saw that kind of come to life in this last game where Keenan Allen went completely off. And that was even after there were a couple misses by Caleb Williams. There was a drop by Keenan Allen as well in the first quarter, but that didn't stop Caleb Williams from continuing to go to Keenan Allen. And the way that he runs routes, how twitchy he is, I kind of, in a very complimentary way, I almost liken Keenan Allen to one of those things that you see outside of like oil change, or car dealerships, where it's like the blow up guy that's like going
inflatable dude.
Like, the inflatable dude. Like, you kind of see like Keenan Allen like make all of these kind of micro movements as he's running routes, and it throws off defenders really well. And there's a reason that it's worked for him this long in his career. So I'm interested to see how they match him up, who they match him up with. Again, whether it's a guy like Devon Witherspoon or Reek Woolen, who gets the better of that. I love those the young defensive back core in Seattle is so much fun to watch. So I do wonder, all right, can you shut down Keenan Allen more than you can shut down DJ Moore? And that's going to matter when it comes to, again, Caleb Williams trying to push the ball down the field. I do think he's going after that record just because, like, what else do the Bears have to do and go after and play for? And Caleb Williams is also very, very cognizant of not wanting to throw interceptions. That's like kind of the biggest priority for him, is to take care of the football as he kind of gets this experience and tries to learn things during all of this turmoil in Chicago. So that's going to be interesting. That's kind of like the plus factor for the Bears. And the only thing that I really think that can hurt the Seattle Seahawks is if you let Caleb Williams and Keenan Allen get going.
On the other side of things, I think the plus factor is Jackson Smith-Njigba for me. He's just been so productive this season, over 1,000 yards. He's been one of the best and most productive slot receivers in the NFL. And quite frankly, I talked about the Bears' struggles in coverage. 37.5 coverage grade last week. That was the lowest in the NFL. Like, no team had a worse coverage grade than they did. So it's not like the Bears have just been bad. They've been really bad. And you talk about, okay, of course, like Jaquan Brisker going out, that's something that is worth noting, but they have everyone else. Like, they have everyone else there. And obviously, like, losing a piece like Brisker, it's not just like nothing, but they shouldn't be dead last in the NFL in coverage grade in a single week. That shouldn't be the case either. Everybody else is out there for them. So they're just really struggling. And Smith-Njigba is a guy to really make you pay. I think the DK Metcalf could be in for a big game as well, just because, again, if they can't get pressure on Geno, he's just going to let it rip on this team. And that's what my big worry is if I'm Chicago. If you can get after Geno, then all of a sudden we got a game on our hands. But if not, Jackson Smith-Njigba, like I said, he'll kill you. Going to Sunday, or actually these are the Saturday games, excuse me. Chargers-Patriots. The Chargers traveling all the way from LA to New England to play against the New England Patriots, who took it down to the wire with the Buffalo Bills. That game was a lot closer than I think a lot of people, myself included, thought that it was going to be. What's your matchup that matters here, Carmen?
I'm really excited to watch Ladd McConkey and Christian Gonzalez kind of go. I'm assuming that that's who they're going to put on Ladd McConkey, given that that has been the guy for Justin Herbert as far as pass catchers go. Christian Gonzalez is allowing the 11th lowest NFL passer rating among corners, and he has just 2 missed tackles, 7th most forced incompletions with 13 among qualified corners. Ladd, though, on the other hand, 8th most explosive catches with 29 among qualified receivers, and he doesn't even have 100 targets, Trev. He has 94 targets this year. So to have 29 explosive catches on just 94 targets, that to me is incredible. And Justin Herbert has 116.7 passer rating when he targets Ladd. So that's, public enemy number one when it comes to, I think, this offense. It sounds like they could get J.K. Dobbins back.
He's my plus factor in this one because he has the highest rushing grade of any of the backs that they have had. He's got by far the most missed tackles forced per attempt. I mean, that percentage is higher. He's got by far the most explosive runs. So, like, that's my big plus factor in this game is, like, if they get him back, it truly elevates the offense. He is by far the best option and most effective option that they have had out of the backfield this year.
Yeah, so that, like, if that ends up happening, I think that balances things out a little bit more. But in the meantime, Ladd McConkey has just been such a constant for Justin Herbert over the last, especially, like, I want to say month and a half. It's just, he's really come on, and it's really good to see. He's great. He's a great guy. I've been rooting for him since Georgia. So that's what I think. Not only the matchup that matters, but just one that I think is going to be really fun because it is Christian Gonzalez is by far and away the strength of this Patriots defense, and to see them kind of go against each other is going to be really fun.
Yeah, in run defense, well, I guess in coverage as well. You are right. Christian Gonzalez is definitely like the matchup player for sure. Marte Mapu, their safety, had a really good game last week, and I'm wondering if he can kind of string it together here, continue that impact. He's sort of that hybrid second-level defender, plays with the linebackers, plays with the safeties. He played really well last week, so you know how him and Christian Gonzalez and that defense in general plays against those wide receivers, specifically Ladd McConkey, how they can slow him down there. But then J.K. Dobbins, too, my plus factor of what I mentioned. On the other side of things, you know, the Patriots were able to keep it close, like I said, with the Bills. And honestly, if not for 3 straight turnover drives to start the second half, maybe they go into Buffalo and win that game, which is crazy. part of that had to do with Kayshon Boutt's play, their wide receiver. We've talked for a while about how the wide receiver room in New England was just never going to be what it needed to be this season to maximize what Drake May is as a passer. Well, Kayshon Boutte last week, 7 targets, 5 catches, 95 yards, a touchdown. Like he was their go-to guy, and he played really well last week against the Bills. And he'll be going up against a player who has been one of the more pleasant surprise drafted rookies that we have this year, former 5th-round pick Tarheeb Still's got a 77.5 coverage grade this season for the Los Angeles Chargers. He has been their big play guy. Now, he had 2 interceptions in one game against the Falcons, and since then, it hasn't been that high impact. It's not like he's been a total shutdown, like Revis Island type of a corner, but we saw from him even earlier this season, he's got an ability to get his hands on the football, force some incompletions. Obviously, you got that multi-interception game there, and he has a couple of more throughout the season as well. So he'll probably be on Kayshon Boutte for a good portion of this game, and we'll get to see who really stands out here among those 2 players. And New England, very clearly, when they have a player in the passing game who they can go to, well, they can move the ball decently well, they can score pretty quickly, and man, it's why when I do mock drafts, it's so hard for me to not give them either Travis Hunter to be part of a wide receiver group for them there, or Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona. Like those 2 guys could be unbelievable for this Patriots team next year. And I think that just the flashes of what we've seen from Kayshon Boutte hint at, all right, when you get an alpha wide receiver, Drake May's going to be ready to really increase that passing output for this team. What about you as a plus factor here? What do you got?
Other than the kind of the motivation that the Chargers have because win this game and they're into the playoffs. I want to just continue to shout out Drake May and the ability that he has been showing, especially, you go against the Buffalo Bills, you keep it close, especially in the beginning of the game, and people take notice. But what's really fun for me about Drake May is just really seeing him show off the athletic ability that I think people don't give him enough credit for. And then the recognition, too, the processing power that he has to recognize certain coverages, certain blitzes, all of that kind of stuff, and then change the play, use his athleticism, throw off platform, be out of rhythm, go against his momentum, pick up these chunk plays. It's so incredibly impressive for a rookie, and especially a rookie that's operating behind a subpar offensive line with, some of you talk about guys like Kayshon Boutte, but there's not a whole lot that Drake May has to work with on this offense, and he's developing at a tremendous rate regardless. He's also taken on such a wonderful leadership role. I think today he just did a press conference with Hunter Henry, and like he's looking at Hunter Henry in the photo I saw online, just like a proud dad. And I'm like, Drake, you're 22, like you're young, dude. And so it's so wonderful to see that blossom because Drake May was one of my favorites kind of coming out of this draft, and I had so much faith that he was going to be so good, given his sneaky athletic ability and just the processing that we saw even at North Carolina. The way that he could kind of think through things on the fly and make things happen with his athleticism. I can't talk today. So yeah, I think it's Drake May just to see what he can do against this Chargers defense that I got a little bit exposed against the Buccaneers a couple weeks ago, but still obviously a very, very good unit. And could Drake May kind of spoil things or make things harder for the Chargers? And I think he could.
Broncos and Bengals. This one in Cincinnati. Big game for the Broncos, obviously, with the loss to the Chargers last week. They're really trying to stack some wins here, get into the playoffs with some good momentum. Bengals mathematically eliminated, right? I don't remember reading it.
No, I don't think they're eliminated yet. Hold on, I can tell you right now.
Well, then obviously, if it's a 1% chance, then
it's a 7% chance according to NFL. Yes, according to NFL.com. Hold on, let me refresh and make sure that's not. That's up to date.
Bengals are playing for their playoff lives out here. They're giving it everything they've got. 7%. Might as well be 100.
They're legitimately like, so you're saying there's a chance?
Essentially, yes. So, okay, in this game, though, this one's in Cincinnati. Obviously, the Broncos would want to get a win, like I said, for seeding and getting into the playoffs with the right momentum, especially coming off the loss to the Chargers last week. Bengals, obviously, if they don't win out, they have no chance. So they need to win out and need help. They're playing for their playoff lives. What's your matchup that matters here for this one?
It's that Denver defensive line against the Cincinnati offensive line. The Broncos defense generated a 38.1% pressure rate this season, which is the second highest. And then, which the important part of that, though, 37.2% pressure rate on non-blitzes. So just getting pressure with four, that's the highest rate in the league. But even when they are blitzing, they're blitzing at 37.8% of opposing dropbacks. And that's something that they do at an incredibly high rate, at an incredibly efficient rate. That's the third highest. And I can't say enough about this Broncos defensive front, just the defense in general. And going against an offensive line in Cincinnati that has dealt with injury, that has just not lived up to the expectations that you had of them. That's going to be a really interesting kind of see how that kind of goes. Like you said, and the Bengals are fighting for their playoff lives. The only shot they have is Joe Burrow going off with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins, all the other stuff, but that starts with protecting him first. And that's been the story of the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow has been able to overcome that on multiple occasions, but that's going to matter in this game tremendously.
Yeah, and the matchup that matters, I mean, you hinted at it. It's Jamar Chase versus Patrick Surtain II. Jamar Chase leads the NFL in receiving yards. He leads the NFL in receiving yards after the catch. He leads the NFL in receiving touchdowns. He is fourth in receiving grade so far this season, and he's going up against a corner in Pat Surtain, who is the number one graded corner that we have in our system with an 86.5 coverage grade. So this is somebody who has the ability, has the experience to also play a lot of single coverage roles. And so we're going to get a lot of Jamar Chase on Patrick Surtain. This is why you draft a player like this, to be able to say, go guard that other guy. Now, it's not like he's going to be on Jamar Chase for every single one of his receiving snaps. You know, that's not going to be the case, but the majority, yeah, that's exactly why you draft this guy on your team. So no one has really been able to slow down Jamar Chase and his connection with Joe Burrow yet this season. And Patrick Surtain's the best chance to be able to do that. And I just can't wait for that one. I think that's a really big time matchup. What's your plus factor here in this one? Because I have a couple for this, and I'll just go whichever one you don't go with. So who's your plus factor in this game?
I'm going on the Denver side of things. Again, Denver wins, they're in. And that knocks Cincinnati out. So these are both very highly motivated teams. But Javonte Williams, Audric Estime on the ground for the Broncos. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at the rookie, and last game, nine carries, 48 yards, the touchdown. You have kind of this really good offensive backfield in Denver that can really, again, help out Bo Nix, help out this offense and make it a little bit more well-rounded, give these guys a little bit more to deal with when it comes to Cincinnati's defense. I just think that it was so good to see this last game. There was a little bit more of a even split with the Denver ground game, and I think we saw that coming too. I think we talked about it last week. So that's something that I would love to see continue. And again, I just think it gives them the best shot given how well-rounded it makes their offense.
So my plus factor, the one that I will actually go with is Chase Brown, because Chase Brown's been having an unbelievable last month. Okay. Over the last 4 weeks, 316 rushing yards, 245 of them coming after contact. And he has earned an elite 90.7 grade in pass protection. This is a 3-down back, somebody that I liked a lot when he was coming out of Illinois. I love the style in which he played. I mean, the yards after contact were just so numerous for him that final year when he was at Illinois, racking up crazy stats, the burst, the speed. He has the athleticism that he showcased at the combine, and we see now at the NFL, but also he is willing, he is smart to be a third down type of a back to really pass protect for Joe Burrow in situations that call for it. So over the last 4 weeks, he has been one of the best running backs, all around running backs in the NFL, I would say. So he is a big time plus factor for me. Him continuing to play well is a big part of why that offense is humming the way that it is. But I'll also say that there's a little matchup that matters, two plus factors, whatever you want to call it. Garrett Bowles at left tackle for the Denver Broncos going up against Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson almost exclusively lines up over the left tackle. He is a right end, a Rio, whatever you want to call it. He is over the left tackle all the time. And so Garrett Bowles over the last month, 81.2 pass blocking grade. He's been able to hold his own. He's one of the more reliable ones in the NFL. And the Broncos offensive line has just been playing pretty well as a whole. So that matchup is a big one, because when we talk about the Bengals, we talk about their stars. It's these guys at the top that are basically carrying the rest of the roster. Trey Hendrickson is one of those guys on the defensive side of the ball who feels like he is carrying that defensive unit. And if he can't shine the way that he has in previous games, well, does the defense do enough to slow down this Broncos offense that's really looking to bounce back? So we will see. Two highly motivated teams here in this one, which is a odd transition going into this game. It's the Arizona Cardinals at the Los Angeles Rams for this next game on Saturday.
Yeah.
The Rams have everything to play for, right?
Sure
the
do.
Rams coming off of a win. They're number one in the division right now. They hold their own destiny. Them getting 2 more wins here down the stretch, they're going to win. They're going to host a playoff game. They're making it into the playoffs. On the other side of things, Carolina Panthers eliminated the Arizona Cardinals from playoff contention last week. And to be honest with you, my matchup that matters is not that we can't get a little bit more into the details. We can. The overarching theme is the Cardinals versus having nothing to play for now.
Right.
Because I think this has been an extremely frustrating second half of the season for the Cardinals, who going into their bye week won 4 games in a row. They went from 2-4 to winning 4 games in a row, 6-4, sitting at the top of the division, going into their bye week, getting a little bit more healthy in week 11. And since week 11, they have gone 1-4. This is a team that has really sputtered down the stretch. I said this on the review show. I don't think Kyler Murray has been terrible this year. I wish he would have been better. I thought it was going to be a better year from Kyler Murray. It was too much of a roller coaster. It was way too much up and down. There were way too many turnover-worthy plays. Since that bye week, he had 5 big-time throws and 8 turnover-worthy plays and a passing grade below 70. It was not the year that I thought Kyler was going to have. And at the beginning of the season, I thought that we were on our way towards an incredible second half of the year, but that's just not what manifested. And so I'm not trying to be overly harsh on the Cardinals, who I still thought going into the year were a team that was close, but just, one more good offseason away from really competing.
Right.
They had a shot this year, though, at sitting at 6-4, 10 weeks into the year. And it's just been bad for them since, including that overtime loss last week. So to me, that big time matchup that matters is simply how motivated is this team? Because this is probably a very frustrated locker room right now. Can they really kind of come together and play this game the way that they need to? Because they certainly know they're going to get the best of the Los Angeles Rams, who are trying to make that at the end of that playoff spot.
Yeah, and that was actually kind of the thinking that I went into trying to figure out the matchup that matters, because I was like, yeah, what do the Cardinals have to play for? What possibly could they kind of play spoiler with the Rams? Obviously, there's that motivation given that they're in the division and they could try to spite the Los Angeles Rams. But more than that, individually, I did kind of settle on Trey McBride still doesn't have a touchdown.
Yeah.
And that's something we talked about.
I thought it was coming
week.
last week.
We all thought it was coming last week because Kyler Murray talked about it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, he's got the most catches without, before his first touchdown, I think ever. So I looked at kind of how the Rams match up with tight ends. Their overall coverage grade against tight ends is 10th. So they're top 10 in that, but they rank 16th in EPA per play allowed versus tight ends. So there might be a little bit of an opportunity there, coupled with the fact that you think that Kyler Murray, again, with nothing really left to play for, if he, wants to get that for his guy, he wants to get the monkey off of Trey McBride's back as far as getting into the end zone. This might be the chance to try and do it when you have nothing else that you really need to accomplish at this point. Just feed Trey McBride, see how that works, see if you can get him in the end zone and really finally get him that first score, because we're going into week 17 here. He's running out of chances to get one.
And shout out to the Panthers, who covered him very well last week, only 20 receiving yards. Yeah. And this is a guy who's been pretty uncoverable. Yeah, I talked about Jamar Chase being in the top 4 in terms of receiving grade. The guy right in front of him is Trey McBride. He's top 3 in the NFL in receiving grade this year. So
much work for so little payoff for Trey McBride.
Poor guy. He's gotten a lot of payoff. It just hasn't been in the end zone. So that is true, though.
Payoff that matters.
My mini sort of matchup that matters, like if you want something a little bit more detailed than just how the Cardinals are going to come out and how motivated they're going to be. The Rams offensive line played really well last week, only gave up 3 pressures total. 2 of them came to Bo Limmer. Basically, the rest of the offensive line played fantastic. In particular, Alaric Jackson had a really great day for them. They're going up against a Cardinals defensive line that last week against the Carolina Panthers, who are also a good offensive line, 49.7 overall grade, just 21.2 pressure percentage, a 50.5 grade from them, just overall, let alone just the overall pass rushing grade, excuse me. And then the run defense grade, I think, was not great either. So it was just a bad day for the Cardinals defensive line, whether it was the pass rush grade of a 49.7, the run defense grade of a 50.5. It was not good. And if they play like that against a motivated Rams offensive line, it's just not going to make a difference. My plus factor is Kyren Williams, because it always is. I talked about this last week. I talked about it on the review show. He is the engine that makes the car go. We all love to talk about Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, what Sean McVay is as a play caller, and how explosive they could be in the passing game. All that stuff is great. It does not operate without Kyren Williams being who he is. So Kyren is, once again, as he always is, the plus factor in this game.
Yeah, and I think that Sean McVay would probably be the first to tell you that. I think he uses pretty much any opportunity he can to shout out what Kyren Williams means to that offense. And I'm also going kind of in, I don't know if you call Kyren Williams an unsung hero, but he certainly isn't talked about as much. But on the defensive side for the Los Angeles Rams, stumbled across something from Next Gen Stats. Safety Quentin Lake, he's one of only 4 defenders in the league to have played 100% of his team snaps.
Wow.
So he averages 62 snaps a game, has played 100% of the Rams' defensive snaps. And as a free safety, that is something that is just extraordinarily impressive and has been a workhorse, clearly. And I haven't heard really anybody talk about Quentin Lake, or certainly not enough for what he's doing for this Rams defense. So again, in a game where this matters to the Rams, it does not matter to the Cardinals, I figured I'd take the opportunity to shout out a guy that's been just a total workhorse in Quentin Lake.
The Giants and the Indianapolis Colts is the next game that I want to talk about here. My matchup that matters is the Giants defensive line with no Dexter Lawrence.
Yep.
Going up against a Colts offensive line that whooped ass last week. I mean, 335. What'd you say?
They've been really good all season.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they obviously have been all year. They're one of the best offensive lines, but 335 rushing yards. That was the most in any single game for any team so far this year. 173 of those yards came before contact. That is an offensive line stat. And this is a group that is just, I mean, they're playing so well. And they're going up against a defensive line with the New York Giants that has not played well. Last week against the Falcons, who are also a good rushing team, because the Colts, got to think about it. They want to run the football, right? It wasn't just last week. Like, that's what they want to do. They want to run the ball with Jonathan Taylor, with Anthony Richardson. That's what they want to do on the offensive side of the ball. The Falcons are the same way. They want to run the football, especially last week, starting a rookie quarterback for the first time. The Giants defensive line against the Falcons offensive line, and just run defense in general, 40.9 run defense grade. That just does not bode well for a team that was incredible last week in the Indianapolis Colts against a Titans front that had been playing well. Like, we've praised Tavondre Sweat, we've praised Jeffrey Simmons, and this Colts offensive line still was able to go after him. Dalton Wasserman on the review show did a great job pointing out, when the Colts have a pulling offensive lineman, they are so tough to beat. It's down blocks, and it's getting these massive dudes in motion, just going straight at their assignments. And so the running backs know how to run behind it. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor had a very successful day. So to me, if the Giants cannot play much better along their defensive front against this Colts offensive line, Colts are going to do the same exact thing that they did to the Tennessee Titans last week, and they're just going to run the football straight at them all day long. So Giants defensive line, Colts offensive line is my matchup that matters. What about you?
Yeah, that was mine as well, given the fact that Jonathan Taylor, 218 yards, 3 touchdowns. And again, when you have a guy like Anthony Richardson, who is capable of some incredible plays downfield, but isn't consistent. I don't think that that's an adjective we would use to describe Anthony Richardson quite yet. That's something that insulates against, some of those turnover-worthy plays or putting the ball in harm's way. It's, can you get stuff done on the ground and not leave it up to Anthony Richardson getting those chunk plays? So that was my matchup that matters, but it also does feed into my plus factor which is Anthony Richardson, but Anthony Richardson on the ground as well. Because he's been used on 32 design runs since resuming the starting role in week 11. That's 10 more than any other quarterback during that span. He's forced a missed tackle on a league high 29% of those types of carries. and he's rushed for 12 first downs. And so when he factors into the rushing game, on top of a guy like Jonathan Taylor, on top of the fact that you have an offensive line that's capable of blocking and doing wonderful things on the ground, that's really hard to stop. And I think that that's what the Colts are trying to do. That's the identity they're trying to establish offensively right now. And that should be doable against a Giants defensive line that, again, like you said, is lacking right now.
I'll go with Laiatu Latu as my plus factor. I think that Anthony Richardson's a good shout out. If you didn't mention him, I probably would have, but it's again a Giants offensive line just going back to the trenches that's struggling along with their defensive line. Evan Neal's really struggling at the tackle spot. Jermaine Illuminor is better at that left tackle spot. So if Laiatu Latu is lined up against Illuminor more times than he is Neal, okay, he might have a little bit more of a quiet day, but 14.0 pass rush win percentage this year, 37 total pressures. He's got 4 sacks, and Latu has shown flashes. A couple weeks ago against the Lions, of all teams, he had 5 total pressures. He had a sack. He had another quarterback hurry. He had a 14.8 pass rush win percentage and an elite 90.5 pass rushing grade. So Latu, I think, could come on strong in these last 2 games because he's a really talented player and has the opportunity to do so in this matchup. So maybe we get a little bit of a game record performance from Laiatu Latu here as that X factor. Jets and Bills. Bills, like I said, just getting by on the skin of their teeth against a team that they thought that they were going to beat. And I think a lot of people look at this matchup and think, oh, yeah, the Jets, they should absolutely beat them. Well, it wasn't as easy as it was said last week against the New England Patriots. Perhaps it's the same against the Jets, who, Aaron Rodgers said after the game, he's like, yeah, well, we're going to find out who really wants to be here next year. And that's just kind of the situation that the Jets are in. Can they stay motivated? You had some interesting comments from Garrett Wilson, who maybe feels like he's not being utilized enough, not being prioritized enough here. So a lot of different angles that we can go here with this matchup, as the Bills are obviously trying to stack as many wins as they can. Hope the Chiefs drop some games here down the stretch. What's your matchup that matters here?
Yeah, I'll get to the Garrett Wilson stuff, I think, in my plus factor. But in the matchup that matters, you look, Olaf Fashanu is on IR. Mm-hmm. So you think that, all right, that left tackle spot, the offensive line kind of in general in front of Aaron Rodgers, given how old he is, and then guys like Vanessa, this Bills pass rush, who have really been great for this Bills team in general. I don't see that going well for the Jets. And I think that it kind of starts and stops there when you're talking about what's going to matter for the Jets and, in the ways that they can hurt the Bills. And again, play spoiler, that's really their only shot is if they protect Aaron Rodgers. And that's, I think, in and of itself going to be a really hard task.
When I think about the Bills and how they've struggled in games over the last, 4 or 5 weeks, they run the ball really well. And so I think an easy thing for me to say could be the fact that the Jets have really struggled in run defense. And if they let the Bills run all over them, then okay, then the game is going to go at the script that we believe that it's going to go. I mean, the Jets have a 56.3 run defense grade over the last month. It just has not been a good season for them in run defense. They have gotten worse in run defense every year over the last 3 years to not playing well at all this season with the guys that they have out there. I know that they've sustained some injuries, but again, if you let Buffalo kind of impose their will on the ground, that's exactly what they're going to do, and they're going to win this football game. So the Jets have to be better up front on the defensive line anyways, but I really think the matchup that matters is if you can get a little bit better and have a better day in run defense, how the Jets corners play against the Bills wide receivers is going to mean a lot, because the Bills have a diverse pass catching group, but in games where I feel like they have struggled the most, they have not been able to lean on that go-to guy. Like, there's not like that go-to guy. We've talked about the presence of Stephon Diggs and him no longer being there. And I feel as though, Sauce Gardner leaves last game with a hamstring. I don't know if he's going to play this week. We'll see. You've got some decent coverage players elsewhere. Obviously, DJ Reed, he was having a really great beginning to the year. So, he's capable. Him and Sauce were one of the best cornerback duos the last 2 years before this season. Can those guys handle the Bills wide receivers? Because when that's the case, and if you could stop the run, slow down the run a little bit more, that's when I feel like Buffalo has been a little bit more vulnerable. When they have had to lean more on the passing game, but without that go-to option. And when you have players like Reed and like Sauce Gardner, they give you the ability to take away, or at least certainly limit, who your top option is. Now, Buffalo's strategy of, okay, well, it could be a different guy as a top option every single week. That's good in theory, but sometimes when your back is against the wall, you want that guy to throw to. And I just don't feel like Buffalo has that player. And it's had its advantages and disadvantages. But to me, just overall, how the Jets corners play against the Bills wide receivers is really what I'm looking forward to here. What's your plus factor in this game?
Yeah, it's that Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers connection that Garrett Wilson is so mad about. Because if you look at Devontae Adams has had double-digit targets in 6 of his last 7 games with Aaron Rodgers. He's had at least 1 touchdown in his last 4 games. Meanwhile, they've all but forgotten about Garrett Wilson, save for that Week 14 OT game against Miami. Garrett Wilson only has 1 touchdown in the last 6 games, and I understand the frustrations that he's expressing right now because prior to Adams' arrival in New York, it seemed like Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson had finally gotten on the same page. Aaron Rodgers had started to trust Garrett Wilson and gotten him the work, and he was going off. He had a couple, triple-digit games before Adams' arrival, and then he comes and it's buddy ball with Aaron Rodgers, and that has been the most successful thing about the New York Jets over the last few weeks. So again, if you're the Buffalo Bills, and one thing that could spoil or make this game harder is if you let Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams start connecting again. You shut that down, though. There's not much else that the New York Jets have been able to do well offensively. So we'll see. I don't know if any of Garrett Wilson's comments get him any more touches, but we'll see. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see.
The last time that Breece Hall had over 80 yards rushing, and the only time that Breece Hall has had over 80 yards rushing this season was against the Buffalo Bills in Week 6. When they were
I hope that happens for his, I didn't want to launch into the Breece Hall thing because I feel like I could go on about this. I love Breece Hall. He's one of my favorites to watch. And I'm just like, why aren't we utilizing him?
They're just, the Jets are just a mess this year. They don't know what to do. They don't have an offensive voice in the room that can stand up to Aaron Rodgers, and it's not gonna get better this season. But if they're gonna have any chance in this game, it's gonna be the formula that they had when they were within 3 points of the Buffalo Bills last time, and that was the last time that Breece Hall had over 80 yards, and the only time that he has had over 100 yards this season. So getting Breece Hall going is the ultimate plus factor here, because we've seen if that's the case. They were close to the Bills last time, so they can be close to the Bills this time as well. The new year is a great time to reevaluate your financial goals, not just for yourself, but also for your family and your kids. Now's the perfect time to make sure that your kids are on a path towards a solid financial future. A kids investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life is a quick, simple way to set that up and lets you invest in their future, which could be, education, big milestones, things like that. Just setting you up to financial freedom. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids cannot invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf, giving their investments more time to grow. Whole thing is online. Setting up an account could take you as little as just 5 minutes. Then you just manage your child's account and monitor all those investments right from your phone. The funds, they can be used for anything. All right. Just doesn't have to be, things way down the road. I mean, if you want to use some of it for when they're kids, tutors, tuition, music classes, summer camp, all that kinds of stuff, you could do that. But also when they're adults, maybe you can keep this around for when they're young adults, first car, first house, starting a business, all that kinds of good stuff. It starts with just $20, no contribution limits, tax advantages. Funds are SIPC insured up to $500,000 plus no commission fees, just a low, flat monthly maintenance fee. You can join thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Titans Jags. This game is monumental for whoever loses. Because these two teams currently picking number 3 and number 4 overall in the draft order. Jacksonville sitting here at 3-12, picking number 3. The Titans sitting here at 3-12 are picking number 4. If the Jags, let's just say if the Jags had an extra win here. So obviously strength of schedule is going to change a little bit, and that's the first tiebreaker for the NFL draft order. If the Jags had an extra win, if they were 4-11, Jacksonville would be picking 7th instead of 3rd. And the Titans, they had an extra win. They were 4-11. Titans would be picking 8th instead of 4th. So you're dropping 4 spots either way for these teams with a win. Now, if you lose, obviously you're probably staying on pace with these teams who are also bad. You're probably staying in the top 5. You're not really dropping too much. We're getting to the point where, the Raiders have had one of these. The Jags themselves have had one of these. The Titans have had one of these. Basically, the only team that hasn't had a detrimental win in the draft order has been the New York Giants, and it's been a while since New England has gotten a win. And so those two teams are on the big-time losing streaks in a good way if they're wanting a better draft pick. So I'm curious, what's your matchup that matters for the team to either win or lose this game?
Yeah, in the vein of Cardinals versus motivation, mine was just kind of like both of these teams against what's good for them. Because you look at just the absolute kind of circus that has surrounded the Raiders after winning that game this week, and you're just like, yeah, I mean, I get wanting to play for a win because you're competitive. You're all paid to play, and there's a pride factor on the line here, and no one's ever going to admit to tanking. But in a year where there are so many teams kind of crowded at the bottom of the league, when you talk about teams that have 4 or less wins, 5 or less wins, and how wildly that can swing the draft order by winning one singular game, you can't really argue that like these teams need to not win and in order to kind of make this worth it, I guess. Because you also think about, hey, it's when you have nothing to play for and you've had nothing to play for weeks at a time to end this season, make that suffering worth it and at least get a good draft spot. Essentially, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I get it from both sides, but both of these teams, like you outlined beautifully, would be wonderful to lose.
Turnover matchup is what matters most. It really is, because these two teams both stink in this category. The Titans are the Jags are minus 15 in the turnover department this year. That's 29th in the NFL. The Titans, right behind them, minus 16, and they're 30th in the NFL. So these are the bottom 2 of the bottom 4 teams in the NFL when it comes to turnover differential. And whoever wins/loses the turnover battle in this game, I think is going to win. I think it is as simple as that. Both of these teams not great at passing the football, although the real X factor that I have here is the fact that, well, I mean, I get, the Titans obviously had a streak last week where they went touchdown, and they came back versus the Indianapolis Colts. But I feel like that was a little bit of the Colts just letting their foot off the gas and then realizing, oh no, this is a one score game out of nowhere. And so to me, it's just, there's not a lot of motivation for either of these teams. I think the Titans coaching staff is certainly more motivated than the Jags, because I don't think the Jags are keeping anybody. I think they're clearing house as much as they possibly can off of this coaching staff. That's not going to be the case with the Tennessee Titans. So these guys do have a lot to play for in terms of future spot on the team, whether or not they could be back next year, how much they are prioritized. So I'm with Walt in the chat. Like, I think the Titans win this game. I'm going to be honest, I don't really know how it happens, other than the fact that I think the Titans have a more diverse passing attack. They have Nick Westbrook-Akine. They have Calvin Ridley. Like, at least they have a little bit more of a diverse passing attack, but they certainly struggle with turnovers there as well. On the Jags side of things, the plus factor is basically Brian Thomas Jr. Like, is Brian Thomas Jr. going to take over for you? Yeah, I mean, it has to be, because he's the most talented player on the offense, and he's basically the only way that I think the Jags win this game. Does Brian Thomas Jr. have a takeover play where he scores a long touchdown, or does he have over 130 yards receiving, like something like that? I just don't see a lot for the Titans or the Jags to hang their hat on, outside of the Jags maybe having a takeover performance from Brian Thomas Jr. So there's not a lot of analytical things here. Both of these teams are terrible. They're 2 of the worst teams in the NFL. They're picking in the bottom 4 of the draft for a reason. There's not a lot of motivation for either of these teams, but I will take the team that has a little bit more motivation with the Tennessee Titans to win this one.
Yeah, and the fun little rookie receiving stat. Actually, I don't even think it's rookie. It's just receiver. Brian Thomas Jr. has 7 games with 60 or more receiving yards and at least 1 touchdown. The only other receiver in the Super Bowl era that has done more than that was Randy Moss, and he had 8 such games. So Brian Thomas Jr. has NFL history on the line right now. If you're going to get that specific about things, and again, I think you should when you're talking about teams or reasons that these teams have to play or to be at all productive. Brian Thomas Jr. has some history to chase. So yeah.
The next game, the motivation's not that much better for the next game. Raiders Saints. We're just knocking them out right here. I mean, the Saints getting shut out by the Green Bay Packers on Monday Night Football. They're hosting this game against
shutout of the year.
First shutout of the year. They're hosting the Las Vegas Raiders, who won last week. I don't know, probably to their fans
again, the detriment.
Chagrin, and they beat the Jags. You know, it's so 19-14. They win last week. They end up dropping from the number 1 overall pick to the number 6 overall pick. The Saints are also picking at number 10. So both these teams losing is paramount for sort of what they want their off seasons to be built around. To me, the matchup that matters, I won't just go total hopeless with these teams because I do think they're going to compete more than the Titans and the Jags are going to. The Raiders offensive line versus the Saints defensive line. When he was kept clean last week for the Raiders win, Aiden O'Connell, 20 for 31, 217 passing yards. And the Raiders offensive line is probably not as bad as a lot of people think. You know, Jackson Powers-Johnson, DJ Glaze, Colton Miller, like those guys all played really well last week. And so the Raiders offensive line is still a pretty good strength of their team, although obviously it's not where they want to be yet. It is a decent unit there. They're going up against the Saints defensive line that has a 30.1 pressure percentage this season, which is 20th in the NFL. So I think the Raiders will be able to block as well as they did last week. So it's going to be 2 weeks in a row where I think the offensive line for Vegas could have a big say in who ends up winning this game, especially if you're keeping Aiden O'Connell clean. So the Raiders offensive line versus the Saints defensive line and the lack of production that the Saints have had in that area is sort of that matchup that matters for me. What about you?
Mine, again, if I'm looking for individual, I kind of went the route of looking for individual reasons to be productive. And that's Brock Bowers versus history, I guess, because he's got all of these. He's got some rookie records as far as he surpassed Sam Laporta's rookie tight end target record already. And he's got a few more that are on the table here. He has 132 targets this year, 1,067 receiving yards. That is second on the rookie receiving yard leaders this season behind the guy we just talked about in Brian Thomas Jr. So there's some really fun things that are still on the table for a guy like Brock Bowers, who again is such a bright spot for the Las Vegas Raiders. Loved him again coming out of the draft. Wanted, to see him go. Actually, I wanted to see him go to Chicago. I thought that would have been fun. But he's been incredible for the Raiders. And then you look at the Saints and how they do against tight ends. 23rd in coverage grade versus tight ends. If you really even call Brock Bowers a tight end at this point because he's basically just a receiver. So that's something that I could see, the Raiders putting an emphasis on and hurting the Saints, especially if the Raiders are kind of hell-bent on still trying to win games. The way you do that is with Brock Bowers.
I guess my plus factor in this game, like I have a couple, right? I mean, like Foster Moreau was the best receiver for the Saints last week. Yeah. Yep. And maybe he could be a plus factor for them. Demario Davis, you kind of just need the Saints defense overall to step up. And I think he's the leader of that group. And if they can play well, if they can hold this to a very low scoring game, who knows, maybe you can get a couple of plays your way on the offensive side of the football. I guess the real plus factor though, it just has to be whoever's starting at quarterback. I believe we think it's Spencer Rattler still for this team because Rattler was bad against the Packers. He had a 44.5 overall passing grade last week. He was two big time throws, but also 2 turnover worthy plays. Adjusted completion percentage was just 61.5%. I mean, he couldn't do anything, as you would expect for a team that scored 0 points against the Packers on the road. You'll never win a football game if that's sort of your offensive output with your quarterback. So to me, I guess Spencer Rattler has to be the plus factor, because if it's not better than what it was this week, you have no chance, no matter what, even against a bad Raiders team. So that's my plus factor.
Yeah, mine was that, along with just kind of the Saints ground game with Alvin Kamara out. And I thought that they kind of lean on Kendre Miller a little bit more. That didn't end up being the case. He played about 40% of the snaps, and that was trailing Jordan Mims. And so they kind of look like they're just trying to figure out what that rotation is in the offensive backfield, which again is one of those things that insulates against subpar quarterback play, which we've seen from the Saints quarterbacks that aren't Derek Carr. And I think that has to be kind of in this if you're trying to again win this game as the New Orleans Saints. But I don't know that I expect Alvin Kamara to be back this season. I don't know how you feel about this whole situation. Like there hasn't been any updates about it, but I just don't feel like there's really much
I don't know
to
why
be
you
gained
would.
from. Yeah,
You know,
exactly. That's kind of my thought process
Walt
too.
saying in the chat that Derek Carr could play in this game.
Yeah, I saw that like might be, but I don't really understand why you push that in this
Carr
game.
would want to play just
Sure.
because he's Derek Carr and like
Right.
he wants to play.
Right. Yeah,
I don't.
I saw that he wasn't ruled out. Yeah, that there was still, I mean, there was talk about that even before this game.
There
Um,
was, and then, yeah, he was ruled
so
out of the
yeah,
pack, but
like
like he didn't practice. I don't think because of that
no.
hand. So I didn't think he was close. And obviously the Saints aren't in playoff contention anyway. So
Right.
why would you really rush him
So
back?
why
But
would you
I
rush
guess
him
Derek
if
Carr
he
would
wants
want
to?
to play. If Derek Carr plays, he's of course the plus factor in
Plus
this one because
factor.
I think the offense looks completely different. And I think the Saints have a real chance if he ends up playing. But I don't know. I don't know if I would bring him back. So yeah, I guess Derek Carr is the ultimate plus factor in
Yeah.
this game if he ends up being able to go out there. All right, let's talk about a game that's got a little bit more on the line here. We'll stay in the NFC South. We'll talk about the Panthers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Panthers
Okay.
coming off a thrilling overtime victory, and they're just a better team overall, really, over the last 4 weeks. The Bucs,
Sure.
a disappointing loss against the Dallas Cowboys, where the defense just did not play very well, and then you had a gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching fumble
Fumble.
to end that game. Of course, if you're a Cowboys fan, you absolutely loved it. If you're a Bucs fan, you were sick to your stomach as you turned off your TV there. So what's the matchup that mattered here in this one, Carmen?
Yeah, and I'm going to continue to as long as the Bucks are still playing. It's going to be whoever's matched up against Mike Evans. I'm thinking J.C. Horn. Mike Evans' weekly tally needs 182 yards in the next 2 games, so 91 yards average each. Didn't I think it was 68 yards in this last game, 69 yards. JC's allowing just a 50% completion rate. Ranks 13th among corners with a minimum of 100 snaps, but he has allowed 5 touchdowns, which is tied for the 8th most. And he's got just a 14.5% forced incompletion rate, which ranks 32 among qualified corners. So if they do actually put JC Horn on Mike Evans, I'm taking Mike Evans in that matchup 10 times out of 10 times. So, and I do think that again, when they're acutely aware of the record that Mike has and also have everything to play for, given that they have to go undefeated the rest of the way, 2 games, with the Atlanta Falcons winning this last week. It's a really tight race. And that stinks because they had the opportunity to win against the Cowboys this last game and kind of take some of the pressure off. But yeah, I just think that the Mike Evans J.C. Horn matchup, if that's indeed who they end up putting on him, is going to be the one that matters because they're going to still try and feed Mike and get him to 1,000 yards.
So the Bucs need to keep pace with the Falcons, who now own the tiebreaker in the division now that they are tied with the Atlanta Falcons. So they need to win out. There's no doubt about it. It's an interesting game against Carolina because in Week 13, a couple weeks ago, they beat the Carolina Panthers in overtime, but it was a game in which Chuba Hubbard fumbled and the Bucs took over, were able to march down the field, kick a field goal, and win the game. My matchup that matters here is both of these teams run defense because back in Week 13, in a funny match of numbers here, back in Week 13, Bucky Irving rushed for 152 yards against Carolina Panthers in that overtime win that the Bucs had. Chuba Hubbard last week rushed for 152 yards in their overtime win against the Arizona Cardinals. Hubbard, who there were pictures of him after everyone had left the field and the field was basically completely empty outside of the people who were cleaning the field. Hubbard was still sitting on the bench after fumbling and losing. I don't want to say like he lost the game, but fumbled the game. Bucs get it. They score. He thinks it's his fault. He's still sitting on the bench long after the game is over, long after the players have gone to the locker room. You know that he would love nothing more as a player who's got a hot hand right now coming off of a 150-yard game against the Cardinals. And he was the winner in OT last week. He got the carry.
Yes.
A guy had a clean shot on him. I can't remember exactly who it was. Went to tackle him. He bounces off of it and then sprints into the end zone. A little bit of an overtime redemption for them, especially with it being in the same stadium. To be able to do that to the home fans, you love to see it. They want to run the football, and when you think about how the Bucs lost last week's game, it was Rachaad White fumbling the football. It was Bucky Irving who was not on the field for the last 9 minutes of the game. Bucky Irving's going to get the damn football this week. Chuba Hubbard is going to get the damn football this week. And whichever one of these two teams stops the other one in run defense, that's the one who I think is going to win. Because it's the formula that both of these teams want to win the game. And it is situationally, given what's happened recently, given what happened in week 13, exactly what both teams are going to want to do. So I think that the run defense units of both these teams are the matchup that matters here.
And you see that Carolina right now ranks dead last in run defense grade. So that you think that the Bucs have the edge there, but they are also bottom third when it comes to run defense, which is very uncharacteristic of the Bucs defense. And you hope that can be better. But that leads right then into my plus factor, which is Lavonte David. Because of what he can do against the run, because he is that rangy middle linebacker. And last game against the Cowboys, it went okay, but they didn't utilize Lavonte David in the pass rush as much as they had the week prior. And in coverage, Lavonte David ended up giving up a touchdown. He only had 2 quarterback pressures against Dallas. And then you contrast that with what they were able to do against the Chargers in week 15. Lavonte David had over double the amount of blitzes than he did against Dallas. So he had 7 against Dallas, 15 against the Chargers, and then was extraordinarily productive, had a sack and a half, and it was all over the field. And that was something that really propelled the defense to the performance that it had against the Chargers. And I think that that's something, I mean, Lavonte David is the one that's calling the defense right now, or at least has been kind of in and out with other linebacker injuries happening. So everything really revolves around Lavonte David, and especially with Antoine Winfield Jr. out, you think that these are your kind of 2 best guys in the back levels of the defense. Obviously, you have Vita Vea and Kalechi Kancey up front, but these are the orchestrators, and Lavonte David is having to do it kind of on his own. So how the Bucs do against the run, but also trying to get pressure on Bryce Young, it worked really, really well against the Chargers when you had Lavonte David involved in the pass rush a little bit more. Will they go back to that given how effective it was and then was not against the Dallas Cowboys? I don't know. I'm really interested to see how involved Lavonte David is, but I just know that Lavonte David is going to be a key piece when it comes to
my plus factor here is any Buccaneers corner.
Fair.
Any one of them, because last week was terrible. Last week was bad for this team. I mean, they were at it. It was a terrible passing grade for them overall. The highest coverage grade for any corner was Tyke Smith at just a 63.5. Zion McCollum was below a 60. Jamel Dean was below a 60. They've got to hold up their end of the bargain. And it feels like over the last month, the Bucs have gone through injuries. I want to make sure that I understand that. When you were down Antoine Winfield Jr. and Jordan Whitehead, I know Jordan Whitehead was designated to return, but when you were down both of those players against Dallas Cowboys, it's tough. It's just tough in general. They've gone through their injuries. I don't want to say that they haven't, but you've got to play better to win football games. So any Buccaneers corner has to play a lot better because Bryce is getting really confident, and he's getting confident throwing to basically anybody. Jalen Coker, Adam Thielen, David Moore. It doesn't like the tight ends. It doesn't matter. He is getting really confident, and if the Bucs corners don't play better, then Bryce is going to be able to keep a pace with anything that Baker Mayfield could throw at this Carolina defense, who, like we just talked about with the Cardinals, limited Trey McBride to just 20 receiving yards, limited Marvin Harrison Jr. to just 38 receiving yards last week. So this is a fun matchup. This is going to be a really fun matchup, and I can't wait to watch that one. Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles. Matchup that matters here. What do you got?
Well, a guy that balled against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this last week, Jordan Lewis. Their nickel corner spends all the time in the slot. So you look at, all right, how does he match up against Philadelphia Eagles, and who is he going to be matched up with? And you have Devontae Smith. He's in the slot about 55.6% of the time. A.J. Brown spends a tiny bit of time in there. I believe like 13% of his snaps this season have come in the slot, but not a whole lot. So you think, all right, Jordan Lewis and Devontae Smith is going to be the matchup. And you look at what Jordan Lewis was able to do with that interception that he willed into existence. I mean, he just ripped it out of their hands. This was an extraordinarily physical game. It was incredible play. And then you see, the heartbreaking fumble at the end if you're a Bucs fan, but also one of the best fumbles I've seen forced this season, because this Dallas Cowboys defense in particular was incredibly physical this last week. I don't know where that came from. Again, the Cowboys have nothing to play for at this point, but you know that they hate the Eagles. That's all the motivation that they need. This is a team that wants to play spoiler in any way that they possibly can. Philadelphia is out of the running for the one seed, given the Lions and the Vikings and how they're going neck and neck for it. But as much as you can get the Philadelphia Eagles to lose for the Dallas Cowboys, they want to do that. So I fully expect this to be another very physical game out of this Dallas defense. And I think Jordan Lewis is going to lead the way, and he deserves a shout out because he balled out last game.
I think the Cowboys run defense versus Saquon Barkley is sort of the obvious.
Yeah. Sure.
But I feel like we have to say that, right? Because you look at where these two teams are. The Cowboys' run defense has been better in the second half of the season. They were dead last in the NFL in run defense grade as a team through the first half of the season. Second half of the season, it is a little bit better for them. Saquon Barkley last week hit 150 rushing yards, but 109 of them came in the first quarter. Then you only had 41 for the other 3 quarters. And I think that's a big reason why you saw them open the door for the Commanders to come back and win that football game. Now, I don't think it's just they were like, oh, like let's ignore Saquon Barkley. Like, I don't think that that's what happened, but it needs to be a little bit more. You didn't
have Jalen Hurts as part of that anymore.
Of course, and I think all that stuff goes into it. But with Hurts and the uncertainty of where he is with his concussion, because, I mean, we probably won't know until much later this week of whether or not he's going to play because it's concussion protocol. How they use Saquon Barkley as a constant for 4 quarters is going to be a major part of the game plan that they're devising in this one. Again, especially against a Cowboys team that really struggles to defend the run, or at least has at certain points this season. So they're better at this, but it's in Philadelphia. You know that they're going to want to run the football with Saquon. They all want to see him, get that record, which I think is still in reach for him, if I remember correctly. How many yards short is he? I can't remember exactly off the top of my head how many yards short he is, but I feel like it is still realistic for him. Because what was it? It was like 124 over the last 4 games that he had. And he got 150 last week. Now let me look up how many he got in the previous week. Where's the Eagles? Eagles. He had only 65 rushing yards. So all right, so it's gonna be pretty tough. He's gonna have to average like 140 or something like that over these next 2 games. But so that might be tough, but it's not a script where you got to get 140 rushing yards. But I do think utilizing him more throughout the entire game has to be a priority on their mind versus the Cowboys run defense unit. What about a plus factor here in this game?
Yeah, well, you talk about guys that have motivation as well. It's Micah Parsons, and he's been on a tear. The last 5 games, he has 6.5 sacks. He's playing to get paid. I know that he came out and said he doesn't care if he's like the highest paid non-quarterback, whatever.
His agent loved that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, whatever. Also, I don't believe you for a second, Micah. So this is something that, he still has a lot to prove, and he can absolutely kind of force the leverage on the Dallas Cowboys, which is something that they would walk right into given the fact that they don't do these contracts until the last minute. I'll never understand it. I'll never understand that as a business practice. I love that it gives the players the leverage because I'm never going to advocate for an organization over the players. But I mean, it's why you see Dak Prescott with no trade clauses and no tag clauses and all that other stuff and being the highest paid quarterback in the league because you waited till the last minute to do his contract. And that's kind of the pace that they're on with Micah Parsons. And so Micah Parsons can continue to force their hand the better he does down the stretch. So these last 2 games, and especially when you do it against a division opponent, that means a lot just internally in general. So I really think that the plus factor here is Micah Parsons getting after, again, the best offensive line in the league. But he's got a lot of motivation personally, and this team in general does too.
Plus factor here for me is Cooper Rush. And again, Dalton Washington on the review show did a really nice job pointing out how well he has been playing. 70.7 passing grade this past game, 26 for 35 against the Bucs, 292 passing yards, had 1 touchdown, 2 big time throws. He had the turnover where he played to JJ Russell, which could have been a backbreaker for them. But outside of that, I mean, he was playing well. He's got an elite passing grade on passes of over 10 plus yards. And so he is getting better. And so I want to make sure that I give him the credit where it is due. And certainly if Kenny Pickett is the starting quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, how Cooper Rush has played over the last 2 or 3 weeks goes into you thinking, all right, he's probably the better quarterback in this game, right? And I think that the Cowboys got to feel good about that anytime that's the case, even going up against a monster that is the Eagles just roster overall. So I don't think Cooper Rush is going to be what Jaden Daniels was last week, but he has certainly been playing better lately. And it is worth noting, at least, that he's playing some of his best football. So plus factor there is Cooper Rush for me. Miami Dolphins at the Cleveland Browns here. Interesting game between 2 teams. Down the stretch, normally, week 17, we get a lot of divisional matchups, but here this is an AFC matchup, non-divisional matchup. What is your matchup that matters here between the Dolphins and the Browns?
I'm looking at just how the Browns try to get pressure on Tua with how quickly he gets the ball out. So it's the Browns versus how quick Tua gets the ball out, because he's
Okay.
averaged the quickest time to throw in the NFL this season, 2.42 seconds. And he's attempted a pass in under 2.5 seconds on 62.2% of his attempts, which is the highest rate in the NFL. So that's all to say that Tua gets the ball out extraordinarily quickly. And that lessens the amount of time that you have to get pressure, to affect the quarterback, to do all of that. That's obviously by design, given the fact that this Miami Dolphins offensive line, I don't think is up to par with having a quarterback who's been injury prone, B, a quarterback that you just paid behind him. I talked at length prior to the season even starting about how much I thought that the Miami Dolphins should invest more in the offensive line, and how I was so surprised that they didn't. But it helps when your quarterback gets rid of the ball extraordinarily quickly. And so even going against a guy like Myles Garrett and the Browns defensive line, yeah, I don't know how you get to him when the ball's leaving his hands that fast.
Yeah, I mean it makes it very difficult, and it mitigates a good pass rush, like we talked about with Patrick Mahomes at the top of the show. Like, they've shifted their entire game plan to be like, all right, we don't have guys who can block in front of us. Well, we better get the ball out of our hands quickly. And I think what goes into, mitigating a pass rush is certainly the run game as well. How well they were able to run the football last week. Miami's rushing last week. Devon Achane, 120 rushing yards on 17 carries.
Finally.
Yeah, 78.7 rushing grade. That was his highest since week 11. Tua, when he's, play action, 9 for 13, 91 passing yards. And so I felt like it was all really working for the Miami Dolphins last week. And part of mitigating a good pass rush is, getting the ball out of your hand quickly, but it's also that run game that's complementary. It's also, the swing game, the screen game, things like that. And it felt like that was all really working for the Dolphins. And so how they played last week goes into sort of your matchup that matters, and continuing to do that against a defensive line that has a guy like Myles Garrett on it. So the Miami run game really is the matchup that matters to me versus the Browns run defense. Browns, since week 8, 72.1 run defense grade as a team. So they are pretty good. So we'll have to see whether or not Miami can continue that momentum moving forward in this one. My plus factor, just to shout out Jordan Brooks, the linebacker for Miami, and how well he has been playing. 90.9 run defense grade, 90.2 pass rushing grade over the last month. So he's been playing some really good football. I believe he is Edgerrin Cooper, I think, is the highest graded linebacker over the last month, which we'll get to him in a couple of games. He's been unbelievable. But Jordan Brooks is right behind him, and that's no oh yeah, what a cute month he's had. No, he's having a really good month, and he deserves a shout out here. He's been a big time X factor in the middle of that Miami defense. So to me, that plus factor is Jordan Brooks and his continued play to really elevate the rest of that team.
Yeah, my plus factor is just, again, Tyreek Hill, because it's just the pace that he's on, and it looks like that's the pace he's going to finish with. Career lows in yards per route, catch rate, EPA per target. The yards per route is one thing. Again, like when you talk about how quick Tua gets rid of the ball, that's not conducive to longer developing routes to let Tyreek kind of get downhill. But no pun intended. I just realized I did that. And
you were talking about Taysom Hill, of course.
Yeah, of course. The catch rate, though, is really kind of what stands out to me when you talk about the career lows that Tyreek Hill has had. And yes, obviously, Tua Tagovailoa missed quite a bit of the season, but Tyreek Hill's catch rate of 63.1% is just, it's not indicative of a guy that's supposed to be your number one target. So I want to see them kind of get on the same page, because if you've got nothing else to do, it's to kind of build up that rapport again. And I don't know. It's been interesting just to not be left wanting with Tyreek Hill week after week this season.
The fact of the matter is, before we move on to the next game, is that if the Browns don't play better at the quarterback position, none of this is going to matter. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, 49.4 passing grade. I talked about this during the review show. If you were making the change at quarterback because Jameis Winston was hurt, like the shoulder injury kind of sort of like kept him out from starting this game, okay, I suppose I get it. If you're making a quarterback change just because like you want to go to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I don't know. Just don't play the next two games. Yeah. Just forfeit. Like let everybody have an extra couple of weeks off. Like I understand. Look, we've talked about this on this show. We've lived the Jameis roller coaster. We covered the Jameis roller coaster. It's incredibly frustrating. I get it. Jameis very clearly gives you the ability to win football games. Now, does he also take into his own hands the ability to lose football games? Of course he does. But like, in my opinion, DTR doesn't really individually give you the ability to win football games. And I say that now, and he's going to have an elite PFF passing grade this game, and they're going to have a triumphant win against the Miami Dolphins, and it's going to be incredible. But from what we have seen of DTR basically throughout his entire NFL career, his floor might be higher than Jameis Winston's, but his ceiling is so much lower. You're not really giving yourself a chance to win football games, especially from how Cleveland's defense has played this year. They've been fine, but they haven't been the dominant unit that they have been in years past. So, if they're going to stick with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, again, if he just doesn't play way better, if the ceiling isn't raised for how he is willing to push the ball down the field, and if he is willing to do that with more regularity, then I don't think really any of this is going to matter from what we saw last week.
For sure.
Packers and the Vikings. The next game that we want to talk about here, flexed this game to the afternoon slate, and it's a huge one, right? I mean, Minnesota is still gunning for the 1 seed.
Yep.
The Packers are
they clinched playoffs, but they
can't technically still get the 1 seed, can they? Like if they
can't. They can't win the division. They can't get the 1 seed. Okay. They're the most likely seeding that they have right now is the 5 seed, and they could get the 6 seed though. Or no, I think the biggest probability is the 6 seed. They could get the 5 seed, but they could also get the 7 seed. Like the most probable seeding that they have right now is the 6. And what's interesting too is the 6 seed has never won more than 11 dating back to 1990 when the field expanded. So the Packers are already at 11 wins. So if they get another win, but they still end up as the 6 seed, they will be the most successful 6 seed in the history of the NFL.
Well, it's either gonna be them or the Vikings, right? So no matter what, the 6 seed is going to be the most successful 6 seed in NFL history.
Yeah, because the NFC North is that absolutely insane. There is a chance though that I think the swing right now is like the Lions and the Vikings could either be the 1st seed or the 5th seed is like the most probable. Mm-hmm. So like that's the wild part too, is like it's wild. And the fact that I actually had a skeet, I guess is what we're calling them, a skeet kind of do some numbers over that. Yeah, I don't know. over the like overnight, because I talked about how the Packers, they got the first shutout of the NFL season. They have 13 wins still on the table, but they cannot win their division, and they are going to end up being a lower seed because the NFC North is that absolutely insane. But this being an NFC North game with Minnesota having so much to play for, I think the Packers, what they've done so well since their bye week is just their ground game. And it's not just Josh Jacobs. Like, I think that's oversimplifying it. Obviously, Josh Jacobs is an incredible player. You saw him last night. He gets, the post-game interview with SVP, all that kind of stuff. But you have other guys that are being involved in the run game. And that's what's so incredibly cool about what Matt LaFleur is doing offensively with this Packers team, is not a whole lot changes for the offensive line, but the creativity behind them has just shot up exponentially since the bye week. So this is a different matchup than it was when these two teams first met earlier in the season. And Minnesota, though, second best run defense grade in the league. So like this is something they do extraordinarily well, and it's just going to be a good on good. That's my matchup that matters. Like, who's going to get the better of each other, because these teams match up so incredibly well. And again, they have so much motivation to play for. I cannot wait for this game and these next couple of games, just within the NFC North in particular, because it's going to determine some drastic playoff scenarios, despite the fact that 3 of these teams have already locked and punched their postseason ticket. Like the seeding is wild, like we were just discussing.
Packers defensive line and the Vikings offensive line is where I'm looking for my matchup that matters here.
Sure.
Over the last month, 88 pressures from the Packers defensive line. That is second most in the NFL behind only the Philadelphia Eagles. You got guys like Brenton Cox Jr. and Devontae Wyatt, Kingsley Enagbare, Lucas Van Ness, like these guys that are just, it's a total defensive line coming together and playing really well for Green Bay. I know a lot of people like to talk about the offensive side of Green Bay. You mentioned the run game, how good their offensive line has played. Certainly Jordan Love, the versatility of their wide receivers. But on the defensive side of things, we've worried a little bit about their coverage unit outside of how well their safeties played at the beginning of the season, but just overall, their corners have struggled throughout the middle parts of the season. The defensive line, though, it feels like they're only getting better. And I'll throw my plus factor into it as well with Edgerrin Cooper and just how Edgerrin Cooper has played at the second level. I mean, he has been unbelievable. So you talk about all those pressures that the Packers have on the defensive line. Vikings offensive line has been okay. Blake Brindell and Garrett Bradbury have struggled in pass protection over the last month. And so if you can, take advantage of them not playing nearly as well, if the unit's not playing nearly as well cohesively overall, I think the Packers are one of those teams that have the ability to take advantage of it. And I think that people are really like simulating this week just to get to Lions Vikings that are going to be next week, and they're hoping that it's got the number one seeds on the line. Packers are sitting here saying not so fast, my friends. Right. I mean, they really are. I mean, they could certainly play spoiler to the Vikings and certainly to the NFL for that last week leading up to all that drama, because I think that they've got the formula to be able to win that game. Now, that's not to take anything away from the Vikings. They've been unbelievable. The road win that they had against Seattle this past week was fantastic. The win they had the week prior was fantastic as well. And Sam Darnold's playing unbelievably well. One of the few areas that we had to critique Sam Darnold was in the red zone, right? You and I have talked about that before, how he had a lot of turnover-worthy plays in the red zone throughout the first, I would say, 10 weeks of the season. Since then, since week 10, 3 big-time throws, 87.1 passing grade when he is in the red zone, 0 turnover-worthy plays. It's just hard to find a fault with this Vikings team, but it is also hard to find a fault with what the Packers are doing and how they have been playing. So Edgerrin Cooper goes into that as well, 92.4 overall grade. That's the highest graded Green Bay Packers player, 75.1 run defense grade, 86.5 pass rush grade, and a 90.9 coverage grade. He's playing so confident, so quick, so fast. Great decision making at this point. It's just a rookie. I mean, he's been really impressive. So this is a slugfest of a game. I wish this was the Monday Night Football game. I wish people got to the whole nation got to watch this, and it was just the only game that we had to think about in this one, or the Sunday Night Football game, to be honest with you. But instead, I guess we all just get to enjoy it on the afternoon. So that's sort of my thoughts on this one. Who's your plus factor for this game?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to not talk as much about the Minnesota Vikings, because I do talk about them quite a bit throughout my weekly kind of rotation of content that I appear on. And it's just what's it going to take for people to really take this team seriously as a contender, because they do only have 2 losses. They play in the hardest division in football, and they've done beautifully. And there's not a whole lot of flaws with this team. Now, you look at their offensive line and you look at Brian O'Neill, who got banged up. I don't expect him not to play or anything like that, but you are kind of seeing some of those injury issues kind of cropping up for them. And obviously they had lost Christian Darrisaw earlier this season. Mm-hmm. Cam Robinson has come in and played beautifully for them, though, at left tackle. Again, that's just something that you worry a little bit about, because you know that if Sam Darnold is consistently pressured, that can lead to some errant throws, that can lead to just kind of some anxiety by Sam. Not anything compared to what he used to be. He handles pressure a lot better than he used to. But that is kind of a way to get to him. And with the Green Bay pass rush, that's kind of my plus factor, because it's come on so strongly, like you were talking about, not only with that defensive front, but like you were talking about with Edgerrin Cooper, Quay Walker. That linebacker level has really been the difference, I think, in this pass rush and how they figured out how to get pressure. With 4, and then also blitzing. They have the second most sacks since their bye week. And that was the biggest issue with this team going into their bye week, was the fact that the Green Bay Packers were not getting pressure whatsoever up front. And the takeaways that the back levels were getting, namely Xavier McKinney, were kind of masking those issues a lot. And so we didn't really talk about that enough. But this team went through a defensive scheme overhaul this offseason, bringing Jeff Hafley in as their defensive coordinator, switching to a 4-3 base system for the first time in 15 years. That matters when it comes to personnel and kind of figuring out where everybody plays best and how to best utilize all of the players that you have. Jeff
Mhm.
Hafley has clearly figured that out, and it's resulted in more pressure and just kind of a more complete defensive effort on Green Bay's part. At the same time, you have the offense gelling like that much more. You have Jordan Love Toyotathon, Jordan Love in his Toyotathon era. So everything is coming together at the exact right time. You look at Matt LaFleur's record in December. It just everything is clicking for this Green Bay Packers team where they've become very, very dangerous, despite the fact that they are the third team in their division. It just so happens that those other teams only have 2 losses. So the Green Bay Packers sitting at 11-4 are the third team, but they are no less dangerous, I think, than the Minnesota Vikings, than the Detroit Lions when it comes time for the playoffs, which is going to be really fun. But this is going to be such a good game. You're right. I
Mhm.
wish they flexed it into the national, into the Sunday night game or the Monday night game. It I wish everybody got to watch this. Although you're going to be in the later window, so more people will see it at least.
And instead, for the Sunday Night Football video, or for the Sunday Night Football window, I should say, Falcons at Commanders. Now, to be fair,
Well,
this is
there
fun
are
too.
implications here.
This is fun, but this is also fun too, right? I mean,
Right,
it's
right,
Jaden
right.
Daniels coming off of a thrilling win against the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's Michael Penix. All right, didn't do a ton in his first game, in his first start, but now, all right, we got the first start under our belt. Let's let loose a little bit here. So it's the Falcons against the Commanders. This one is in Washington. What is your matchup that matters here for this one?
Yeah, I have to think that so the Commanders 10th ranked run defense grade here, and you look at what the Falcons do well, and I'll get to Michael Penix Jr., but you also think Bijan Robinson. I mean, that's such a huge part of what they do offensively, and again, it's something that is going to be needed against this Washington defense, which again is good against the run this year. So I really do think that it kind of comes down to who wins out on the ground, and if the Falcons can get going with Bijan Robinson. And can the Commanders slow that down? But at the same time, I'm not putting anything past the Commanders, just given what we've seen this season in general. I can't remember the exact stat, but Jaden Daniels has 2 of the 4 latest go-ahead touchdowns in the league this year. So you think about that Hail Mary that was hit at 0.00 on the clock against the Bears, and then this last week they come from behind with the Philadelphia Eagles. This guy has the clutch gene, and to see that come out of a rookie is wild. But in order to keep pace with them, the Atlanta Falcons are going to need to get some stuff on the ground, and you're going to have to see some good things from another rookie and Michael Penix Jr.
Falcons pass rush,
Yeah,
resurging pass rush
surging Pat. You're right. You're right.
against the Commanders' offensive line. That is the matchup that I'm looking forward to watching in this one. The Falcons pass rush over the last month, 72.1 pass rush grade. That is 6th in the NFL. Their total pressures of 75 over the last month are 13th in the NFL. They also have a 77.5 pass rush grade when blitzing, which we have talked about. Okay, they're blitzing a little bit more now. They're blitzing from just their linebackers, not necessarily their secondary players. So a lot of those box defenders, they're focusing on getting pressure from those guys. And so they're blitzing quite a bit more than they were previously to really help out that pass rush. And it is working. 55 total blitzes over the last month. That is also 10th in the NFL. So straight up, their pass rush is, no matter how you look at it, it's especially when blitzing, they are in the top half of the league, if not in the top 10 of the league in certain categories. They're going up against Commanders' offensive line that I would say through the first 6-7 weeks of the season were really good. It was a top 10 offensive line in the NFL through the first 6, 7, 8 weeks. Can't remember exactly where the good cutoff would have been there for them, but they're really strong to start the season. Second half of the season, though, especially the last month, 61.8 pass blocking grade. That's 26th in the NFL. They just have not been as strong of a unit. So it is one side of the ball that has played well at certain points of time this season, just not over the last month, versus a really hot pass rush for the Falcons, at least for their standards. So how they continue to play well, or if Washington can really step up, snap back into gear, and get back into form like they had at the beginning parts of the year on that offensive line, is something that's going to be a big difference maker for them. Plus factor here in this one. What do you got?
Well, one more thing too about the Commanders' offensive line. You think about how good they did earlier in the season. Well, what was happening earlier in the season? Jaden Daniels was not throwing down the field. His average depth target was one of the shortest in the league. So you're getting the ball out quicker. You're not having to hold on to it at all. Shorter passes, things that don't take longer to develop. And you've seen that this kind of inverse relationship with as Jaden Daniels' average depth of target has gone up, the offensive line play has gone down. And it's because you're having to hold the line a little bit longer. Jaden Daniels is holding the ball a little bit longer. He also scrambles around, and he has the most scrambles of any quarterback in the league. So you also have to take that into account as well with the offensive line. But I think it's a really good call out to say, yeah, we haven't seen, now that you're kind of running the more complete offense with Jaden Daniels, we haven't seen this offensive line be able to keep up. But my plus factor is obviously Michael Penix Jr.
Mm-hmm.
What was really interesting to me this last week, though, with him making his first start, I think the Falcons are going about it the right way in a lot of ways in trying as much as you can this late in the season, with all of this to ease him in. They utilized motion 81% of the plays in week 16. That's their highest in a game this season by far. It's a 21.7% increase from their rates from weeks 1 through 15, which was 59.3% rate of motion. So this is all from NGS. And then you think about, okay, well, what does that mean? Did that really benefit Michael Penix Jr.? And when you utilizing motion, 16 of 20 passes, 178 yards for Michael Penix Jr. And when they don't, he completed just 2 of 7 passes for 24 yards and an interception. So that's something that, again, I've talked a lot about what motion means for especially young quarterbacks, and how the Bears were not using enough of it with Caleb Williams, and then Thomas Brown took over, and then you saw the uptick in motion. And what it does is it gives the quarterback a lot of information, right? Pre-snap information. If you're utilizing motion, you can identify coverages, you can get leverage, you can test safety's eyes, you can gain. There's so much to be gained with that pre-snap, and it can tell the quarterback so much. And so with a guy like Michael Penix Jr., who has played so much football already, given how old he was coming out of college, and he had the injury issues, but he's a little bit older, so you think that maybe that clearly translates from this last week. You can see like it translates into him kind of understanding the game, not to mention him being able to sit on the bench and observe through the first part of his NFL career. That's materialized into someone that can recognize things very easily, especially if you're giving him as much information as you possibly can. So I'm really interested to see how much that keeps up and what Michael Penix Jr. can do with that, especially in these games that do mean a lot for the Atlanta Falcons.
I think his go-to pass catcher in Drake London is going to be the plus factor in this game. We know that they're going to run the ball well, that we know that that's what they're going to want to do with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, one of the better run blocking offensive lines in the NFL. But Drake London leaves last game with a hamstring injury. Raheem Morris says afterwards he could have gone back in had the game been closer, but we didn't want to risk it with him. We didn't want to further that injury. So if he's good to go this week, he's going up against Mike Sainristil and Marshawn Lattimore, who are two good corners, but had coverage grades in the 50s last week and just haven't been playing well as of late. So with Michael Penix Jr., we saw what he was able to do with a guy like Rome Odunze and really just all three receivers at the Washington when he was in Washington's football program over the last couple of years. So he is somebody who really knows how to feed a target that is worth it. And Drake London is absolutely worth it. I think he could have a monster day in this one, as this could be a fireworks show. I really do think that this could be a high-scoring matchup between the Falcons and the Commanders. All jokes aside, with wishing that the Packers and the Vikings were on primetime football, I think that the Commanders and the Falcons are going to give us a good show. Yeah. Last game that we have to cover here is Monday Night Football. It's the Detroit Lions at the San Francisco 49ers. I think going into the year, there's a reason why the NFL was probably really excited about this game, scheduling it for Monday Night Football. But, the San Francisco 49ers are a beat-up football team. We learned a couple of days ago that Trent Williams is not going to be back this season. They've been through a lot of injuries along the offensive line throughout the season. The offensive playmakers as well. Brandon Ayuk obviously not in the lineup. Now they're down a lot of their star running backs as well. It's just not quite the same Niners team that I think the league thought that they were getting when they scheduled this game and thought that it was going to be what everybody was loving to see potentially for a leg up on the number 1 seed in the NFC. But Lions still have to travel over to San Francisco. San Francisco is still a good football team. What's your matchup that matters here, Carmen?
It's this through no fault of their own. It's the injury bug, but the Detroit defensive line just hasn't been able to get the pressure at the rate that they were even a couple weeks ago. And losing Aleem McNeil, I made a huge deal out of that because I really did think that was going to be the difference maker in what this defense is able to do up front, especially, but just get pressure in general. And if you look at this last game against Chicago, yes, the Lions jumped out to that 20-0 lead. But it was kind of back and forth the rest of the way. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that they could not really get pressure on Caleb Williams, and how good Caleb Williams still did against the Lions, even when they tried to pressure him. What's interesting is that if you go back to the first time those two teams met, Caleb Williams also still did well against the Lions, and especially in throws over 2.5 seconds, which is almost exclusively what Caleb Williams has, unfortunately. That's something that has been an issue for them just against Caleb Williams in general, which is, I don't know if that's Caleb Williams specific or we're just seeing a downturn in the pressure that the Detroit Lions are able to generate. We know that they've upped their blitz rate tremendously, almost like week by week. They keep blitzing more and more, essentially because they're losing guys and they don't really have a choice. But you also don't really have the guys on the back level due to, I mean, Carlton Davis is out. You have a lot of injuries back there. You have a rookie starting in Terrion Arnold. That's not something that it's kind of just, you're trying to hide too many things here if you're Aaron Glenn. And if the blitz doesn't get home, you don't really have the secondary that can contend with that. So how that matches up with Brock Purdy and getting it to guys like, you know, George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and the weapons that he still does have, that's going to be the difference maker here, I think, in the 49ers having any sense of keeping pace with what the Detroit Lions are capable of offensively, which I think will carry them through the end of the year, although we'll see about that Minnesota game in week 18. But that's something that I'm really concerned about going into the playoffs then, because for as many points as you can score, you're probably going up against teams that can score that much too. So that's not this week, but that's just looking ahead. This week in particular, I want to see how well they can get pressure on Brock Purdy.
A little more micro for mine. I'll go to Penny Sewell and Nick Bosa, these big-time headline players who are actually coming off of down weeks compared to their own standards. When you look at last week for Nick Bosa, just a 58.4 pass rush grade and a 10.0 pass rush win percentage. Both of those are single-game season lows for Nick Bosa. And then on the other side of things, Penny Sewell, 47.2 pass blocking grade last week. That was also a season low for him. So these are two of the most talented players in the league at their positions, two of the biggest household names of their positions, and they're going to look and they are looking for bounce back performances here. So they're going to be fully motivated to get the better of one another. So among the many matchups in this game, that's a big one that I'm looking forward to watching. My plus factor in this one is Deebo Samuel, because with as many injuries as the 49ers have had in their running back room, Deebo Samuel was their best rusher last week. He had 5 carries for 25 yards, but he had 75.4 rushing grade. That was the highest of any ball carrier. Now, obviously, he's great as a receiver still. 9 targets, 7 catches, 96 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. So they're going to use Deebo Samuel in all sorts of ways, but him out of the backfield, I mean, the 49ers are a team that we joke / not really joke about them being sort of like running back proof. Like you just basically put anybody in San Francisco. And, you know, when you're down guys like Trent Williams and now Aaron Banks as well, like it's not as easy when you don't have that offensive line play. But Deebo Samuel's been the best ball carrier that they've had. And I think that certainly last week was a testament to that. So I wonder how much more they are going to lean into that this week, perhaps even just like make him a designated running back, which we saw part of that at South Carolina when he was with the Gamecocks when he was in college. You know, he was that hybrid receiver running back type of a player. And I wonder if the 49ers are just going to lean into that even more because of how efficient he was last week, knowing that they've got to run the football well enough to keep pace and keep balance with the Detroit Lions. And certainly when you can run the football well at home, that really helps you out. So that's my plus factor. Who's your plus factor before we get out of here?
Yeah. And especially with the injuries to, I didn't talk about the injuries to the Lions inside backers too. You have Jack Campbell, but you're on like your 3rd, 4th, 5th guy. So you think that running the football against them should be doable. And this is the team to do it. But no, my plus factor for the Lions is Jameson Williams again, because he went off this last game against Chicago, 143 yards, 5 receptions on 7 targets. If you look at the last 5 games in particular, he's had at least 7 targets, which you don't think of Jameson Williams as a guy that's really a volume guy, right? He's there in the Detroit offense to be that gadget guy to stretch the field, to get downfield, and open it up for Jared Goff and kind of open up all of the underneath stuff. He has become kind of more of a volume guy over the last 5 or so weeks. And he's had a tremendous amount of success doing that. I mean, you're looking at double-digit yards per reception. This last game, obviously, the 143 yards, 28.6 yards per reception, had the touchdown. He's had a touchdown now in 2 straight games. It's something that just brings so much to this Detroit offense when you have him, but then you also have a guy like, you still have Jahmyr Gibbs, despite not having David Montgomery right now, who I was really interested to see against Chicago if the run pass split was really going to change, if they were going to kind of lean off of the run game and try and go more towards the air. And the uptick in work for Jameson Williams would kind of point to that. But at the same time, Jahmyr Gibbs still ran a ton, and you saw him run in all different ways. It wasn't just getting him out in space. He did have some north-south stuff, some stuff up the middle that was extraordinarily effective. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs takes it personally that, Monty's out. That's his guy. He wants to pick up the slack in any way, shape, or form. And Ben Johnson is going to figure out ways to make it happen. Clearly, up to and including fake fumbling based on something that the Packers actually did. Just the audacity that Ben Johnson has. So I actually think, for as much as I said Jameson Williams, I do think Jameson Williams is going to be a factor here because I do feel like he's going to be the guy that you take a shot with down the field. But I do think that a bulk of this is going to be Ben Johnson saying, oh, Kyle Shanahan, you're the running back guru? Bet. I got you. Come see what my guys can do and what I can do as far as my run scheme goes with my offensive line that's so good, which they are. I fully expect Ben Johnson to continue his petty tour and really this offense be a kind of run first with some shots down the field, which is why Jameson Williams can be such a huge factor for them this week.
I feel like we got to get a Statue of Liberty play here from Ben Johnson, just for the ultimate flex.
That's such a good idea.
Because he's right. That's the only team that could basically do it. Think of just how much fear the Lions strike into the hearts of defensive coordinators and defenses. Like, there's just so many ways where they could beat you that if you do that Statue of Liberty fake, I think it's gonna work. Like, it would work. So that would be the ultimate icing on the cake of what was an incredible regular season for the Lions and for Ben Johnson. So I feel like maybe a Statue of Liberty is coming. There we go. 16 games spanning from Wednesday to Monday, from sea to shining sea, all across the country every single day.
Keep the patriotism up.
We've got, just extreme patriotism here on Christmas week. Appreciate everybody watching and listening to the show a day early here on a Tuesday. We hope that you guys have a wonderful holiday, whatever it is that you're doing. Spending time with friends, family, enjoying good food, or just watching some football, whatever it is. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to everybody out there. For Trevor, Sikkema, and Carmen Vitali, thank you guys so much for watching this show. We will be back with you on this channel on Thursday to recap the Christmas games, but Carmen and I will be back with you at, I think, our regular time last week. I should probably check the schedule before I make announcements like this, but sometime next week, we're going to be back with you to preview what will be the final week of the NFL's regular season with so much on the line. Can't wait for it. Have a happy holidays, everybody. We'll see you next time.